Hello, my name is Itamar Lerner, and I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Texas at San Antonio. Today, I'm going to present to you a pilot study attempting to examine whether physiological measures of regular day-to-day habitual sleep could predict the degree of stress response we experience following exposure to real-life stressors. The general background to the following study is the attempt to understand post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. PTSD is a mental condition that can sometimes appear after people experience a severe traumatic event, for example, life-threatening combat, rape, and so on. Its symptoms include recurrent memories of the trauma, flashbacks, avoidance of trauma reminders, and so on, that persists for more than a month. Sleep disorders are also very common to PTSD, and there is a growing understanding that abnormal sleep after the traumatic experience may not only be a symptom of the disorder, but also contribute to its initiation. However, much less studied is the possibility that some sort of sleep deficiencies have already existed in those people who are prone to develop PTSD. In other words, it is not just the quality of sleep after the trauma, but the quality of day-to-day habitual sleep before the trauma that might matter. Existing literature that did examine this question suggests that this indeed might be the case. Sleep deficiencies may tend to pre-exist in people that develop PTSD after a traumatic event. There are two types of studies examining this question. First, field survey studies in people with PTSD, especially military personnel, who self-report the quality of sleep before experiencing trauma. Those studies suggest that indeed factors like sleep duration, insomnia, and existence of nightmares before the trauma could all suggest higher probability of developing PTSD after experiencing a traumatic event. Another type of studies examine the effects of sleep on PTSD in the lab through paradigms like fear conditioning, which model real traumatic experiences using small-scale stressful stimuli that subjects are exposed to, like a mild electric shock. In those studies, physiological responses of the body to the shock, including autonomic system responses and brain activation, can be measured, as well as physiological sleep measures, such as the amount of time spent in different sleep stages. Prior lab studies examining how habitual sleep affect physiological measures during conditioning have found that a particular sleep stage, rapid eye movement sleep or REM sleep, can predict the physiological responses to fear, including brain activation in relevant areas. Specifically, higher percentage of habitual REM sleep out of the total time spent in sleep predicted smaller stress responses and lower activity in fear-encoding circuits in the brain. In other words, it seems like habitual REM sleep serves as a protectant from excessive stress response during exposure to fearful experiences. All in all, field survey studies show that low quality of sleep before trauma, based on subjective sleep assessments, may increase PTSD likelihood after trauma. But they don't say anything about particular sleep physiology that contributes to this phenomenon. Lab studies with humans and animals, on the other hand, show that low degree of REM sleep before fear conditioning predicts stronger brain and body responses during fear conditioning. But they're not directly testing people with PTSD, only a lab model of PTSD. A question then rises: does poor habitual REM sleep prior to trauma predict higher likelihood of PTSD and PTSD symptoms after highly stressful experiences? This is what the current pilot study was set to explore, trying to fill in the gap between the field survey studies and the laboratory studies. To examine this question, we planned a longitudinal study using a population of emergency responders, like firefighters and paramedics, who are routinely exposed to highly stressful and sometimes dangerous experiences as part of their job. We recruit these emergency responders just before they begin their training course and measure their habitual sleep for a week using physiological sleep monitoring devices. Then, through a battery of online surveys, we assess their current stress responses to recent events, as well as various other factors that could be relevant. We then repeat these assessments along the months following the conclusion of the course and beginning of fieldwork. This allows us to explore whether habitual REM sleep is able to predict who among them would be more vulnerable to excessive stress responses following exposure to job-related stressors. We monitored sleep using an EEG device that measures electric conductance in the scalp and can differentiate REM sleep from other sleep stages. Importantly, this device is designed for home use and can therefore be self-applied by the subjects for multiple nights. We measured stress responses using standardized tests for PTSD, job satisfaction, and burnout scores, and also asked subjects if they recently experienced any highly stressful events. Additional measures like demographics, mental health, and personality traits were also collected. So far, we have recruited 16 participants, including 11 firefighters from the San Antonio Fire Department and 5 paramedics from the Emergency Medical Services in Austin. We will present results from 10 firefighters who have completed 2 assessments so far at baseline and right after the end of the training course before starting their field work. Consistent with our prediction, we found that the percent of habitual REM sleep measured before the training course showed a trend for being negatively correlated with the increase in stress responses to recent stressful events. In other words, subjects who regularly spend higher percentage of their sleep in REM tended to have smaller stress responses for events happening during the training course. We also found that the percent of habitual REM sleep was positively correlated with subjects' feeling of compassion satisfaction from their job, for example, reporting that they feel satisfaction from helping others, and so on. So to summarize the results, as we predicted, percent of habitual REM sleep was associated with weaker stress response and more compassion satisfaction at the end of the firefighter training course as compared to baseline. Note, however, that those 2 effects are only related to the 6 months before and after the course. We are yet to measure those subjects after they begin their field work, when real stressors are expected to appear. What are the next steps in this research? First, we need to conclude the pilot study, recruiting some more subjects and follow up all subjects 6 months into their field work. But we also plan to extend the study to include a larger population of emergency responders and add brain activity measurements when subjects are asked about the risk experiences to try and clarify the neural mechanisms mediating the effects of REM sleep. To conclude, I'd like to acknowledge my lab personnel who worked on this project, particularly my graduate student, Emerson Larius, and the support of the pilot project research grants at UT Health Science Center in Houston. Thank you for listening.